Hey there, friends. Welcome to episode 194 of SelfKind with me, Erica Webb. So today I am answering a question of sorts that's come through from a listener, which I'm really excited to dive into. And it's around this idea of reclaiming self-care when all that we've really witnessed growing up is examples of sacrifice and martyrdom, where we haven't really had self-care and what that truly means demonstrated to us. We've had no model for that. How do we actually start to move beyond those beliefs? How do we start to carve a new path for ourselves when we've never really seen anyone do it before? So that is what we are going to dive into next. All right, so this week, a couple of people recommended that I listen to a podcast that they sort of sent through the link for and said, this is right up your alley, you're going to love it. And it was an episode of The Imperfects with Lael Stone, who is a parenting expert. And they were talking all about parenting and the conversation ended up going towards this direction of like self-care for parents. And so a couple of people reached out and said, hey, I think you'd love this episode. And one of the people who reached out said, hey, maybe this is a great topic for your podcast. Maybe you want to do an episode about it. And as soon as I read the little, kind of message that came after that, I was like, yes, let's talk about this. This is really important. And I want to share a little bit of what was shared with me. I'm just going to kind of like touch on the main points without kind of giving any personal information away. But this person reached out and said, after listening to this podcast episode, what I realized is that I didn't ever see my mum demonstrating self-care, exercise, or rest. And now, as a mother myself, I'm having a really hard time keeping any kind of regular self-care practices up. And she went on to sort of suggest and share that her picture of a good mum is one that is always available, right, to her family, one that is constantly cleaning, one that is never really doing the things that she needs to do for herself, like exercise and rest. And so this is a really common, normal, shared story. That was my belief about parenthood as well for a really long time. And I'll share a little bit more about my story shortly. But this can keep us so stuck, because if we're not aware of that belief that we have, right? Because objectively, we would, even the person who sent me this email said, like, that sounds so silly or warped when I actually type it out. Like, I don't even really believe that. And yet, here's this belief that's driving my behavior and keeping me from the things that would actually make me feel better, right? So this is the thing. If we're not aware of the beliefs that are kind of driving our behavior, we don't have an opportunity to get unstuck. We just keep playing out the same narrative because those beliefs that we hold right, deep underneath the surface of our conscious thinking are what impact how we think and then therefore how we behave. And so if we have this picture in our mind of this perfect mother or perfect woman or perfect human who does X, Y, Z to look after her family, then how do we behave in a way that ultimately turns that picture on its head and feel okay about it? It's very hard to do, right? So I want to break that down a little bit. While we're talking about this, I want to point out a couple of things. I am no parenting expert. That makes me want to laugh, actually. Parenting is one of the hardest blooming things I've ever done. So I'm not going to talk about this through that lens of recommendations for parenting. But I am going to talk about it through this lens of what is your role, right? And how do you want to be in relationship with yourself? And as I talk about this, I'm going to continue to use mother as my descriptor. However, I know that everyone listening isn't necessarily a mother. This is not exclusive to motherhood. So as I talk about this, if the word mother doesn't fit, I really invite you to switch it out for something else, right? This can relate to our relationship with friends. Like, what does it mean to be a good friend? This can relate to our romantic relationships. What does it mean to be a good partner? This can relate to our relationship with work, right? What does it mean to be a good employee or a good business owner? So the title of mother, and sort of talking about it through that lens, is specific and yet can be very much generalized to some of the other roles that we play. Okay. So we have stories, and these stories drive our thinking, and that thinking drives our behavior. And for most of us, when it comes to self-care, we really haven't had that modeled to us. If you think about where have you gotten your information about self-care, I'm going to hazard a guess that a lot of it has come from things you've read, things you've heard, things you've been told, but very little of it probably has come from things you've actually witnessed other people do. Particularly your mother, right? Particularly the women in your life, particularly those people that raised you, because it wasn't really the thing that was done. We witnessed sacrifice, we witnessed hard work, we witnessed martyrdom. And that goes on to inform what we, hold as our beliefs around that role in our own lives. Now, our models are our peers. And I wonder, how many of them do you see truly modeling self-care? And as a little secondary question to that, when they do exercise self-care, what do you really think about it? And I would invite you to really pause and think about that question. And I'm going to share my thoughts, and I'm going to share some of my processing around that, because I want to show you that you don't have to just be like, well, I think it's wonderful, they're fabulous, it's such a good thing for them to be demonstrating. But understand that what you think about that is going to give you some clues about what your underlying beliefs are around what it means to be a good person, mother, human. Okay. So what I can tell you for sure is that going into motherhood for me, or even partnership, or, employeeship, business ownership, was that I had to sacrifice. The early years with my kids were ones of like absolute sacrifice and martyrdom, to the point where I hated who I'd become. I was resentful, I was exhausted, I was burnt out, my mental health was very messy. And I continued to sacrifice myself, even when I knew it wasn't good for me, even when I knew it wasn't really particularly good for the people around me, because it was all I knew how to do. And when I would see other people engage in self-care, I would feel that they were selfish. So that points to me having some very firm and clear beliefs around what it means to engage in self-care. Engaging in self-care meant that you were selfish. It meant that you thought you were better than everyone else. It meant that you thought you were more important than your children or your partner or your whatever. And so you can imagine holding those beliefs, how engaging in self-care might feel. It's not going to feel very good, because the whole time it's happening, you're like, well, I'm obviously the worst person. I'm obviously the worst mother. I'm obviously selfish and lazy and awful. And so why would you go back and do that again? Why would you do that? It feels terrible. And so you can see how our ability to engage in self-care is going to very much be influenced by what we believe it represents and what we believe it means. Now, when I see people engaging in self-care, that is not my default answer. My default answer oftentimes is a little bit more of like, I love that for them. I love that for them. I am so thrilled that they have the resources and the capacity to engage in the things that fill their cup. But I would be lying if I didn't say that sometimes meaner thoughts come up. Now, this is coming from me, who touts self-care and self-kindness like all day long. So I want you to really hear this when I say that sometimes still, years and years and years into this practice, I will still think, well, that's nice for them, right? I will still sometimes have that thought because these beliefs are so deep seated. They are so built into us as we've witnessed what we've witnessed growing up. So the practice of becoming more comfortable with self-care has been incredibly intentional. It has been one of questioning those beliefs, understanding what I want to align myself with, and intentionally celebrating when I see other women doing that for themselves. It doesn't necessarily happen by default. Now, I don't always feel comfortable sharing those like more hidden parts of myself because, sometimes it's not comfortable to talk about the things that still kind of push our buttons. But I really, really want you to understand and hear from someone who has like truly invested a good portion of their life talking about this stuff, that it is a practice, choosing to meet ourselves with kindness and compassion, choosing to move towards the things that we want is intentional. It is a practice. And so it's not something that we just suddenly default to and everything becomes easy. We have to make decisions as we go about like, is this actually how I want to respond? Is this actually what I want to believe? How do I want to actually behave and treat myself and be in relationship with myself and be in relationship with other people? Okay, I went off on a little bit of a rant there, but have a little think about that. What is your reaction when other people engage in self-care? Because it's going to give you some clues about what it means to you. I know there will be some people listening who are like, I love it. I literally love it when everybody engages in self-care. I have zero guilt engaging it in myself. And I love that for you so much. But there will be just as many people, if not more, who listen and think, yeah, I feel guilty. It makes me feel like a bad person. I see other people doing it and I think, what's so good about them? So hear it and, if you're the latter, know that there's some ways and some things that we can do that will help to move you towards a more comfortable relationship with self-care. So let's break this down a little bit more. We know on a psychological, intellectual level that self-care is good for us. We even know a lot of what we could do to look after ourselves. But doing it, if it engages you, or if engaging in those practices actually triggers guilt, then we need to look towards the stories that are underneath that. We've touched on that already. I've shared a little bit about my own story, but I want to go into it a little bit more. So when my kids were really little, I had a story that everything I had to put in 100% effort for everything. So I made every morsel of food that went into those children's mouths from scratch. I persisted with breastfeeding even when it was really not very good for me and my mental health. I wouldn't leave my children really with anyone. And so I declined a lot of external things, right? I said no to a lot of stuff that would have filled my cup. I just resisted a lot of things that would have been helpful because I felt like I had to do it all on my own. And so anytime that I would engage in any kind of self-care practice, I would A, feel guilty, and B, find that I felt worse afterwards because the entire time spent quote unquote, looking after myself, I had spent beating myself up. And so it was a very vicious circle and one that made me sort of feel stuck in that pattern for a really long time. What I want to share with you though is like how we move beyond that, because you might, again, like intellectually understand, I need self-care. I need to fill my cup. I feel resentful, tired, burnt out, etc., etc. But it doesn't seem to matter what I do. I cannot seem to make it stick. We are trying, for those of us who have never witnessed true self-care before, whether it be in a parent figure, the women around us, our peers, we're really trying to carve a new path for ourselves. We're trying to do something that we haven't had shown to us. And that's hard. right? It's like starting anything from scratch. If there's not a blueprint, it's messy and it feels really uncomfortable. And that's really ultimately what we're doing. We don't know how to do things that we haven't had demonstrated to us until we do. But if we want to change that cycle, then we have to take responsibility for how we do that, right? So here's the thing. First of all, we need to do something. We need to remember that as human beings with human brains, our brain is constantly going to try to keep us safe. And trying to keep you safe is almost synonymous with just keeping you the same, right? Because if we do the same thing as we did yesterday, it's very familiar and it's safe, even if it's not, necessarily objectively good for us. It is familiar, therefore it is safe. So what we want to think about when it comes to actually doing something is to pick something that feels just a little beyond our current comfort zone, like adjacent or even straddling our comfort zone, right? Like 1 foot in, 1 foot out. We want to do something that feels easy enough to actually do, but is different enough from what we've been doing that it feels like, something new. So this is why I talk so often about the small changes that we can make, the 5 minutes of movement, the 2 minutes of, mindful pausing and breathing, the 5-minute walk around the block. What is something that feels small enough that you can achieve, but also gets 1 foot out of your comfort zone, right? Gets 1 foot out of yesterday's reality. Yeah. That's one part of this, but we also want to be kindly checking in with and kind of like interrogating in a nice way, in a nice cop kind of way, those beliefs that keep us treading water. Because until we interrupt those beliefs, until we start to make new ones, we're going to feel ourselves being pulled back into that cycle. Because your beliefs drive your thinking and your thinking drives your behavior. So thinking about who showed you what self-care looked like? Who showed you what motherhood looked like? Who showed you what being a good human looked like? And then looking at it and being like, do I want to subscribe to that definition now? If what was demonstrated to me, if what I witnessed growing up was that to be a good mum, I had to sacrifice, I had to suffer. Do I want that? Do I want that? And if I don't, what do I want to believe instead? And this is where the kind of questioning our beliefs and then doing something kind of come together and merge. Because in the doing something new, we're laying down new evidence for what is possible. And in questioning the beliefs, we're opening up the space in order to do that. And so there's this kind of going back and forth that happens. So I know that as I started to engage in more self-care, and this is ongoing, right? There's still parts of me that will pop up and make me go, oh, there's more to be done here, because I still hold some of those beliefs under, deep down. So this is ongoing. That's something that I think is really important to understand. And I don't know, how old are my children? My children are nearly 11 and nearly 9. So I hit rock bottom when my youngest was probably 6 months old. So this is, a good 8.5 years worth of work, and I'm still unpacking stuff. So please be patient with yourself. But this is where those things meet, because then when I would go and engage in self-care, there was this process of then, okay, I am feeling uncomfortable. I have stepped 1 foot out of my comfort zone, and oh my goodness, it doesn't feel comfortable. That's when we meet ourselves with compassion. That's when we meet ourselves with kindness and be like, this does feel hard. I am feeling some level of guilt or discomfort or whatever. And it's really important to me that I move in the direction of this new belief, this new reality that I want to carve out for myself, this new way of being. And so I'm going to do this thing, and I'm going to meet myself with compassion in the discomfort, and I'm going to lay down new evidence of what is possible for me. And we just kind of keep going through that process. we need to know what new story we want to tell. And, again, to use myself as an example, I said in a class that I was teaching just recently, like, my lived experience is the only one I have to draw upon, in the sense that it's the only one that's mine, right? It's the only one that I can embody. And so I will share from that place because it's the most authentic place to share from. But, for me, the story that I want to tell is one of being a woman who is in I should have thought about this, shouldn't I? A woman who is in like a really honest relationship with herself, who takes what she needs when she needs it, knowing that a solid, nurturing relationship with herself is going to ripple out into her other relationships and out into the world. I know without a shadow of a doubt that I can have the biggest impact on my family, my community, and in my work when I have a good relationship with myself. And so that is what drives everything that I do, because the moment that I am my own worst enemy is the moment when, everybody else becomes my enemy too. And so that for me, it's coming back to that desire to be my own best relationship, to be my own best friend, to be in response to what it is that I need. And that isn't always comfortable. There are times where I'm like, I seem to need a lot, right? Like, but it's just this continual process of meeting yourself with compassion and working towards that new story or that new belief or that new definition of what it is you want for yourself. I wrote down one of the notes that I wrote down here. I'm just sort of checking in to see if I've missed anything, is this recognition that we are entering new territory when we do this, whether it's new territory like as a society or whether it's new territory just for us. And so there's that on the one hand, and then on the other, it's this question of like what I was just talking about, like, what am I committed to? And putting that information somewhere, right? If you use a diary, if you use your notes on your phone, is there somewhere you can write down what it is you're committed to around your relationship with yourself, around your idea of being a good mother or being a woman or a human or a person in relationships? What is it that you're committed to? When we know that, then we're less likely to just simply let ourselves be kind of like blindly driven by our underlying and perhaps expired beliefs. A lot of those beliefs, when you bring them up and you start to interrogate them, you're like, I don't even believe that. When you objectively put those facts out in front of me, I'm like, no, actually, no. I don't believe that women should sacrifice themselves. I don't believe that women should put everybody else's needs ahead of their own. I don't believe that women should, fill in the blank. I don't believe that humans in relationships should. We might lay the facts out and be like, none of this is something that I want to be true. And yet that belief is driving my behavior. And so we need to know what is it that we're committed to instead, and then take those small palatable bits of action to give ourselves the evidence to lay the foundations for that new reality. So if I come back to the question or the conversation that was happening in my inbox around this, having a hard time keeping up a regular yoga practice, we have to know, like, what is that yoga practice representing to me? What is it giving to me? What part of that thing that I'm committed to does that contribute toward? So if it is that I am committed to being more well-rested, more connected to myself, more nourished in myself, then understanding that 5, 10, 15, 20, 30-minute yoga practice is what helps me to feel that way, then we look at it and we go, okay, I know what I'm committed to. I know what story I want to align myself with. How can I do this in a way that makes it easy for me to start? Is it 5 minutes in your diary every day? Is it 30 minutes twice a week? Know that as you engage in that practice, there might be some resistance. There might be some part of that old story that comes up and says, but should you? Are you sure? Is this really, what you want to do? And we have to be willing then to meet ourselves in that moment with compassion, remind ourselves of what it is we're committed to and what we're trying to move towards, and move in spite of that discomfort, moving towards what it is that we want. And we will go through iterations of this. We will go through periods of this. Consistency is a lifetime thing. I laugh because, a lot of us think of our habits in terms of, 30-day cycles or 60-day cycles. But the reality is we're kind of working with habits that we're trying to build for a lifetime. And the specifics of them might change, right? Like maybe right now it's yoga. Maybe down the track it's going to be lifting weights or riding on your bike or whatever. The specifics might change. But our commitment to meeting ourselves, to being in relationship with ourselves, to caring for ourselves is a lifetime pursuit. It doesn't stop. It doesn't end. And so we have a need to be sustainable in our approaches. We don't want to overwhelm ourselves. We don't want to be in this position where we put our expectations so high that we can't possibly meet them, right? If you out the gate are like, right, I'm examining my beliefs and I've decided I'm committed to 60 minutes of yoga at 6 a.m. every single day. There's a very good chance that unless you've been building up to that for some time, that is just not going to be sustainable, because it's a big ask. But if you make those changes a little bit more palatable, if you make them a little bit more doable, if you make them a little bit easier, if you step just 1 foot out of that comfort zone, most likely you'll find that it's a little easier to build that momentum. And I really do think that understanding what it is you're committed to, like understanding that bigger picture belief that you're trying to work towards, that you're trying to lay down evidence for, that you're trying to build, that is going to be more sustaining than simply having something like do your yoga on your calendar, right? So you might just still have do yoga on your calendar, but you know that underneath that is a commitment that is so much bigger than that yoga. I made a commitment to myself that my mental health was more important pretty much than anything else, because I know that when my mental health is more robust, like when I'm feeling more robust, everything else is better for it. When I allow my mental health, or when I am in a situation where my mental health has taken a back seat, everything's hard. Everything's harder. My relationships suffer. I suffer. Everything suffers. And so for me, my ultimate commitment is to my mental health, is to my mental well-being, and nurturing that and getting the support for that, and having the habits and practices in place that allow that to be okay, right? But understanding that means that then when I am faced with a decision of like, I need some time to myself because I feel like I can feel the feelings that remind me that, hey, you need to get out for a walk, or a walk would be helpful right now, or you need some alone time, or whatever it might be. It's not just about that moment in time and being like, oh, but the family needs to eat dinner and I'm going to be leaving that responsibility to someone else, or I have to ask for help, or whatever it might be. You're looking at a bigger picture. You're looking at a bigger commitment of like, actually, it's bigger than dinner, right? It's bigger than this moment. It's bigger than this instance in time. Okay, I feel myself rambling. I feel myself almost ranting, but this is one of those things that I could talk about for literal hours. I hope that meets you somewhere today where you need to be met. I hope that it offers you some really tangible things if you are finding that there is a level of guilt that comes to meet you when engaging in self-care. And while it's not our fault that we've never been, able to witness true self-care, perhaps in the people around us, if we want a different story, it is our responsibility to build it, right? Yeah, I'm going to leave it at that. I would love to hear your thoughts. I love to hear from you. You can reach out to me via Instagram. It is super easy to find me over there. I'm at Erica Webb _SelfKind. You can also, if you're on YouTube, comment here. And you can come and find me over on my website as well, which is ericawebb.com.au. I had to think about that. There's a contact form on there as well where you can email me. I would love to hear from you. I would love to hear your thoughts. I would love to hear your takeaways. And I would love, love, love to hear your questions. All right, until next week, my friends, keep being kind to yourself, and I'll talk to you soon.